The question now before the United States, would we rather spend our money on wasteful projects that would help the friends of President Obama and the leftists, or should we have a strong military in case somebody wants to defeat our country and put us into subjection? Well, that's the issue coming now before the American people. The Obama administration is planning on serious cuts in the military budget, including slashing the Army to its smallest size since 1940. You remember, that's before World War II. Critics say it would just be seen as a sign of weakness.
The plan is raising some red flags among both Democrats and Republicans in Congress. Caitlin Burke has that story.
It's a plan for a smaller, more nimble military, one that can respond on short notice to crises anywhere on the globe, but won't have the manpower to be part of larger ground wars like in Iraq and Afghanistan.
We chose further reductions in troop strength in order to sustain our readiness and technological superiority.
Hagel insists that the smaller military won't put the U.S. at risk, but both Democrats and Republicans in Congress are questioning the new battle plan. The U.S. Army has a current active duty roster of about 522,000 soldiers. Hagel proposes it be cut down to 440 or 450,000, the smallest size since before World War II. Congressman Buck McKeon, the Republican head of the House Armed Services Committee, says the administration is, quote, trying to solve our financial problems on the backs of our military. And Democratic Senator Carl Levin says the proposed changes will face a huge challenge from lawmakers. But Hagel says budget constraints demand changes be made.
This is a time for reality. This is a budget that recognizes the reality of the magnitude of our fiscal challenges.
Still, another reality is that other major powers, like China and Russia, are investing heavily in their military capabilities right now. And the U.S. still faces threats from multiple areas of the world. CBN News spoke with Legislative Director of the American Legion, Lou Celli. He says military cuts are always perceived as weakness.
Terrorists are going to look at reduction in military force as a win for them and a possible opportunity to gain the upper hand.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Got a lot of work to do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the problem we're facing. And you see some of the budgets, you just are appalled at what we're wasting money on. You just say, can it possibly be that a great nation will allow itself to be like defeated by a bunch of Lilliputians, 1,000 cuts, everybody wants his little piece, and there isn't enough to go around. But one thing a government has to do is to keep the nation safe. That's what it's there for, and if it doesn't do that, it's failed. Well, there's something else. They don't want to keep us safe. They want to take control. The Environmental Protection Agency went on trial in front of the United States Supreme Court. And one of the swing guys is Justice Kennedy, and he may be wavering in his firm support for that agency. John Jessup has that story.
Pat, those who believe federal agencies are out of control took their latest case to the High Court. As Paul Strand reports, this time they were asking the justices to put the brakes on what they call overregulation from the EPA.
The court in the past has indicated it wants the Environmental Protection Agency to fight global warming. But those filing suit warn if the EPA isn't shackled by proper laws, it could end up having draconian control over almost anything in America that uses power and emits carbon.
While the questions in this particular case are incredibly complex, what it boils down to for opponents of the EPA is they see this as another incredible overreach and overregulation by yet one more agency of the Obama administration.
One lawyer fighting the EPA's go-it-alone ways says if America wants to regulate greenhouse gases, its lawmakers alone have the right to create laws for the EPA to enforce.
If this is an issue that needs to be addressed, Congress has the ability and authority to address it. If it is something that the Environmental Protection Agency has authority and discretion to address, they are welcome to address it, but you can't take authority where their authority hasn't been vested by Congress.
But those friendlier to the EPA say this is a case of businesses that just don't want regulators trying to control their carbon emissions.
Industry has sued against every action by this administration on any aspect of greenhouse gas regulation. There is nothing, it seems, that industry likes about any aspect of greenhouse regulation. That really is the backdrop.
EPA opponents warn this is just another case of an out-of-control administration riding roughshod over its constitutional limits and making its own laws.
We certainly have grievous concerns about the overregulation and the declaration of the President of the United States that he's going to use his pen and his phone to accomplish that which he is unable to accomplish through congressional action. The role of the President is to inform Congress and ask Congress to take action.
Left to make up its own regulations, critics warn the EPA could someday decide to control carbon emissions by 6.1 million American sources, like schools, hospitals, and churches. Paul Strand, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court hasn't decided whether to hear the case of a German homeschooling family seeking to continue asylum in America. Homeschoolers like the Romaikis have a history of being persecuted in Germany. In 2010, an immigration judge granted them asylum. The Obama administration fought that decision 2 years later, and an appeals court sided with Attorney General Eric Holder and the Justice Department. The Supreme Court was expected to review the case, but it was missing from the court's consideration list Monday. Attorneys for the family say they remain hopeful the court will take it up. Well, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer is under intense pressure over a proposed law involving religious and gay rights. Critics say the measure discriminates against gays by allowing some businesses to deny them service. Supporters say the bill simply protects religious freedom when necessary. For instance, if a bakery run by Christians doesn't want to provide a cake for a gay wedding. Voters in Arizona passed a state constitutional amendment banning gay marriage in 2008. You can find out more about this case by going to cbnnews.com. Pat?
Well, we have a news report the other day that Eric Holder was saying that he doesn't think state attorneys general need to enforce defense of marriage acts that are passed in their states, that they have a freedom to ignore that. Well, I just don't think this is right. And what we're looking at here is a basic fundamental right of American people to conduct their business in ways they want to, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. They obviously can't leave trash out on the streets and pollute the environment and so forth, but there's something basically un-American about forcing a bakery to bake a wedding cake for a couple they don't like. They don't like the people, that's the way it is. Remember the great soup Nazi in the Seinfeld series? He had a right to serve soup to anybody he wanted to. And I think you've got the right to bake for whoever you want to, or to provide wedding photography to anybody you want to. This is ridiculous that they would force them to do something else. John?
I totally agree.
Yeah, okay. John?
Pat, the Oscars are just a few days away, and many were excited to see Johnny Erickson Tada perform her Oscar-nominated song at the awards. But the Academy withdrew the nomination over what some call a technicality. Charlene Israel caught up with Johnny at the recent Movie Guide Awards in Hollywood, where she performed the inspirational hymn.
Author and speaker Johnny Erickson Tada felt honored when she was approached about singing a song for a new Christian film. The song, Alone Yet Not Alone, is the title for the film of the same name. The true life movie tells the inspiring story of two women and their journey of faith and survival during the French and Indian War. Leading through the wilderness. A diving accident in 1967 left Johnny a quadriplegic and in a wheelchair, something that made recording the song a big challenge.
My lungs don't work very well. I don't have a lot of strength physically, but you do, Lord Jesus. Let me borrow your lungs, Jesus. And he certainly gave me his strength.
Johnny's rendition of the song was so good, it received an Oscar nomination for Best Song. But the Oscar nod caused an uproar in Hollywood and fueled questions about why a little-known song, sung by an unknown artist, could receive such recognition. The Academy investigated and later pulled the nomination, saying composer Bruce Broughton used his influence as a former Academy governor to get the nomination. Broughton says all he did was send an email asking others to consider the song. The Academy president said sending the email crossed the line because it gives the appearance of an unfair advantage. Broughton says that's ridiculous.
If you actually read the rules, and you can go on the Oscar.com website and read the rules, I didn't really break any rules. What I admit to doing was sending some emails to people who would probably who I thought would likely overlook the song. They don't agree with me on what I did, and that's basically what it is. As far as the rule breaking, you know, all of the songs that are nominated and all the songs that weren't nominated have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars of promotion behind them with major studios.
Our assignment when we were doing it was to write a song as inspirational as Amazing Grace before Amazing Grace ever existed. We tried to make it simple, universal, and just timeless. And memorable.
Many see the Academy's move as bigotry against Alone Yet Not Alone's song and message. Other members of the Academy, including famous film composer Hans Zimmer, calls the ruling unfair. But Johnny hopes that good will come from the controversy surrounding the song.
Well, when I heard the nomination was rescinded, my first thought was, oh, come on, really? But God's purposes are working out, because some of this controversy, I think, might be drawing more attention to the song and even to the film than had it just sailed through to the Oscars.
Charlene Israel, CBN News, Hollywood, California.
Well, back here in Washington, House Republicans are set to unveil a plan to simplify the tax code. It would lower the top tax rate from 39.6% to 25%. It also adds a 10% surcharge on some income over $450,000. The surtax would not apply to capital gains or stock dividends. The plan would bring in about as much money as the current system, and most people wouldn't see a change in how much money they pay in taxes, but the tax code would be simpler. And Pat, it would be interesting to see exactly where this goes in a midterm election year.
I remember Jimmy Carter talking about an old Southern thing, it's a disgrace to the human race. That tax code is an absolute monstrosity. It has more pages than the Holy Bible. It is just a monstrosity. It needs to be changed. But there's one thing that I have looked at years and years ago. I talked to one chief of staff of the White House some years ago, and when George Bush got it, he tried to correct somewhat, but I don't think he did it right. It's a business can deduct interest off its taxes and not have to pay tax on that amount of money. But if it pays dividends, it has to pay tax before the dividends are sent out. They do not get a deduction for dividends. So George Bush put something in effect that allowed some of that to flow to the recipients of the dividend, but that didn't really correct the problem. And they should have a situation where corporations can deduct the amount they pay in dividends. And that would enable them to stop borrowing so much money and have a tax break on getting in debt. And that was a bad thing for business, it still is. But when they're tinkering around with the tax code, the one thing that the corporate tax in America is one of the highest in the industrialized world. And taxes need to come down, but my goodness, there's so many crazy things in that tax code. The whole thing needs to be scrapped, and they need to write a simple document. And the big thing is the big joke is figure out how much money you've got, put it on a postcard, and then send it all into the government. I mean, we hope that it didn't get that way, but that's what they're talking about.
Motorists are rising up against a government program that forces them to pull off the road and answer questions about their driving habits. 60 cities take part in the National Roadside Survey of alcohol and drug driving. Government contractors, in some cases off-duty policy officers, stand in the street and direct drivers off the road and into a parking lot. The drivers are then asked about their drinking and driving habits. They're also asked to take a breath test and offered money for blood and saliva samples. People complain the stops are unlawful intrusions on their privacy, and at least one man has sued. Federal officials say the program is voluntary and an important tool for monitoring safety. Federal regulators will consider a plan to allow a new fertilization technique that could eventually create babies from the DNA of 3 people. The Food and Drug Administration is holding a 2-day meeting this week to discuss how to test the approach in humans. The technique raises serious questions, including whether the government should sanction the creation of genetically modified people, or so-called designer babies. But the leading researcher in the field says he's simply trying to avoid devastating diseases in children. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.